that should go to the proper patients that need our help. Some HCIs, Mr. President, pay people, and this is a true story told to me by one of those who are in PhilHealth as one of the investigators. Mr. President, they pay people 1,000 pesos to act as patients in order to claim for more serious ailments from the PhilHealth. At ito po, true story din po. Binanggit sa akin ng isang investigador. Some provincial primary hospitals were once inspected by surprise by investigators from PhilHealth, checking the logbooks of patients and inspecting the rooms kung saan po sila natutulog, kung saan po dapat sila nakalagay. Wala po silang mahanap na tao o pasyente doon sa lugar na yun. Hindi po nila mahanap itong mga pasyente na yun. And when asked, the hospital staff would say that they will call the patients. And the patients would arrive and go back to their beds. And when asked, Mr. President, where they came from, may isa daw na sumagot, nagpakain lang sila ng baboy. And of course, other excuses, which are absurd excuses to say the least. And Mr. President, other unscrupulous HCIs would give a patient mere paracetamol and send them home, but they would charge PhilHealth for the room, the medicines under that patient's name, and come up with fraudulent or made-up illness claims. Mr. President, very important yung scheme number 3 na yan because it has something to do with another scheme that I will show a bit later on. On the IT overpricing and padding, as earlier already claimed by Mr. Keith and other whistleblowers, that's all self-explanatory, Mr. President. One item, the Adobe Master Collection Software, 1 unit, 12,400% increase, Mr. President. Unbelievable! I've never seen such patong na 12,400%. Although they say it has not been spent, money has not been released, nevertheless, Mr. President, an attempt to defraud government and the people of the Philippines with this type of padded costs are unspeakable and unforgivable. Mr. President, and finally, the alleged scheme number 5 on the legal and administrative cases. All the cases that I mentioned, Mr. President, all should have been acted upon by legal of the PhilHealth department or PhilHealth itself. Number one problem, Mr. President, orders from the legal sector to ignore court rulings on fraud. Mr. President, Supreme Court and Court of Appeals final decisions on suspension of hospitals remain unimplemented, ignored by the PhilHealth. Court of Appeals decisions, there was one, for example, the Perpetual Sucor Hospital in Cebu, which was taken up in the Senate previously, remain unenforced. Among others, a Supreme Court final decision sustaining the suspension of General Santos Doctors Hospital for being found guilty for claiming payments for ghost patients has been put on hold. That sends a wrong signal, Mr. President, kaya walang natatakot na mga airing HCIs or healthcare facilities. Walang natatakot na hospital dahil nga hindi naman sila kinakasuhan at hindi po sila pinaparusahan. Ang malaking parusa kasi, Mr. President, yung suspension ng kanilang accreditation. Hindi po ginagawa ng previous PhilHealth administrations po ito. The next one, diluted cases against airing PhilHealth officials, Mr. President. PhilHealth employees involved, for example, in the Pamela Del Rosario fake cancer claims in Region 1 were charged with administrative case of simple neglect only, Mr. President. The admin cases were even dismissed, despite clear evidence of their participation of these illegal activities. A certain attorney Emily Roque, filed only charges for simple misconduct against 10 employees who had been positively identified by PhilHealth anti-fraud personnel. Last year, the cases against these employees were also dismissed, Mr. President. And I would like to ask them later on to clarify if that is true. The anti-fraud personnel, PhilHealth anti-fraud personnel submitted a 200-page comprehensive report, which was reduced to a 21-page report by internal audit. Mr. President, once more, may I move that we subpoena this particular 200-page comprehensive report on the Pamela Del Rosario case, Mr. President. I so move.
Hearing no objection, motion is approved. The Secretary will issue a subpoena to the second.
The reduced internal report, Mr. President, replaced the detailed findings of the PAF, clearly identifying the role of each employee in the scam. It was clearly reported that the same employees connived to create the false account, while majority of the claims in the regional office were being processed at 60 days. These Pamela Del Rosario claims, Mr. President, were processed by the same employees at an average of only 10 days. Clearly, we can see the disparity there, Mr. President. And, Mr. President, the similar scheme reported by the same group of anti-fraud personnel Region 1 for at least 30 other ghost members. There were 30 other cases, Mr. President, that was being ignored by PhilHealth Legal. And if I'm not mistaken, at that particular point in time, the head of the regional vice president for Region 1 was attorney, was attorney Rodolfo Del Rosario, who's now head of legal. Mr. President, the third is prolonged inaction on cases against erring hospitals, Mr. President. I would like to ask this a bit later if I still have time for VP Legal Rodolfo Del Rosario.
Well,
Mr. President,
we've given you more than 10 minutes already, but
may I just wrap up, Mr. President? May I just wrap up quickly?
yes.
This is quite important to the case. Mr. President, there is one example, with the permission of my colleagues, this is just very important. There is one example of a fraudulent hospital, particularly Corpus Hospital, Mr. President. 220 cases were filed against this healthcare institution, forwarded by the Fact-Finding Investigation Enforcement Division, FFIED. I have all the documents with me here, Mr. President, all with me. Forward to the Fact-Finding of Region 1 for filing with the prosecution office. Until now, no cases have been filed, Mr. President, and then Regional VP Rodolfo Del Rosario refused to act on a directive of former OICP CEO De La Serna to file 200 counts of charges against Corpus Hospital for document fraud. I have all the names here, Mr. President. All 220 of them are all listed here. And yet, in 2019, unfiled cases were remained to the legal department in the central office. To this day, these cases remain unfiled. To wrap up, Mr. President, paano natin maayos ang katiwalian dyan sa PhilHealth, Mr. President, kung wala namang kaso ang fina-file at wala po mga taong ikinukulong, Mr. President, kung ganitong pangyayari dyan sa loob ng PhilHealth. So, Mr. President, on the second round, I would like to ask these people in charge what their comments are of these findings. And we'll submit to the committee as well all the documents that we have in these these fraudulent schemes done in the PhilHealth, Mr. President.
All right, thank you, Majority Leader. We will place everything on record and all those documents. Senator Zubiri, the Majority Leader, we now call on the Minority Leader, Senator from... Before Senator Leon, yes, the
Majority Leader mentioned Hospital Maynila. I remember last Tuesday's hearing, sinabi ni Rene Limsiaco na nabayaran na nila. Can you submit to us the proof of payment to Hospital Manila? Thank you. Submit na lang.
All right, thank you. You have proof of payment. All right, because the local official said that they have not received anything. Anyway, Senator Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, for the last two hearings, what was unraveled before this committee of the whole is their very rampant corrupt practices, both in the interim reimbursement mechanism and in the computerization and of the operations. I have two suggestions that we should for the committee report. Number one, we should craft legislation which would allow the president to reorganize PhilHealth. Why? This will provide immediate relief from all these corrupt practices which are still ongoing today, and would weed out the corrupt ones without their being able to claim that there is no just cause for their termination because they are covered by civil service rules. Again, we would submit for the consideration of the committee remedial legislation to immediately address the corruption by a statute which will authorize the president to reorganize. And in the reorganization, observe strictly the rules on appointment of personnel in PhilHealth under the GOCC Governance Act, which is designed precisely to allow only those who satisfy the fit and proper rule to be appointed to sensitive positions. Our problem today, Mr. President, is if we have to go through the process of civil service, etc., we cannot address the corruption. This suggestion we are submitting for consideration, but this is without prejudice to whatever criminal aspect that may have been incurred because of these corrupt practices. The second recommendation that I have, again subject to the committee's decision, is to outsource the computerization, because the attempt to computerize is even burdened by allegations of overpricing on the IT equipment and services. So we will submit the second recommendation to the Committee of the Whole that we should consider contracting out the computerization of PhilHealth, so that if we have a prestigious IT company doing the computerization for PhilHealth, then we just pay for the services and the result of this computerization without getting into many of these bidding processes, which obviously because of the embedded corruption can never succeed in terms of getting the best for the government. So therefore, I would submit that as part of my recommendation, Mr. President. Having said that, may I ask for some specific questions on the IRM, the interim reimbursement mechanism? Do we still have COA, Mr. President, with us?
COA, supposed to be, yes.
Yes. Are they around, sir?
Virtual online, the COA, will please respond.
Anyway, apparently there is none. But we would like the interim reimbursement mechanism, as we said in the previous hearing, is a misnomer, because actually these are advances being made. It is obvious now. But we want to know, and anybody can answer this in PhilHealth. What are the COA rules on cash advances?
Chairman Aguinaldo is online, unless somebody else will answer on his behalf.
Yes, can we request if the chairman of the COA is still around, or any of his representatives? May we know what are the COA rules on advances to those employees?
Mr. are you responding?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes.
Answer the question of Senator Dillon.
I think our Chair Mike Aguinaldo, is attending this virtual hearing. So, he may want to answer it first.
If you can answer it, are you from COA? Are you from COA?
Yes, sir.
Okay, can you answer my question, please? What are the rules on advances to government employees or to an authorized government employee or entity, private entity?
Normally po, advances have a specific purpose.
Okay.
And once the purpose or purposes of such advances have been met, they are required to liquidate
Okay.
with all
So
the
basically-
necessary documents.
So basically, it must be consistent with the purpose for which the program was created. And
Of course.
there must be liquidation.
Yes po.
When should the liquidation be made?
The liquidation should be made within 60 days or when the purpose has been met already, whichever comes first.
Okay, you have heard the testimony so far. When in your view is the purpose for which the advance was made fulfilled, which will trigger the obligation to liquidate? You on that?
If I may, sir, last Thursday po, we had a meeting. The President Morales, requested for a meeting with us. And we advised him on this IRM. We informed him that as fast as possible, this liquidation should be required already. So they will know how much would be the actual balances of their funds being given to the regions. But as it is, parang as of last meeting po namin, around 1 billion pa lang has been liquidated. But it doesn't mean na those balance from the 14.7 billion given to the regions or to the HCIs, it doesn't mean that only 1 billion has been spent or expended. It is only because there is no liquidation yet, so they do not know how much actually were spent and how much would be the remaining balance of this 14.7 billion. That's why I suggested and we requested na i-fast track or i-facilitate nila yung liquidation, and then for those regions which have many COVID cases, they should give the balance of they should pull out those balances and give to those regions na talagang maraming COVID cases. Kasi it would be unfair naman na ang laki-laki ng pera ng isang region, wala naman po siyang masyadong COVID cases, and then there are regions na ang dami nilang patients, pero wala naman silang enough funds for that. Yun po yung in-advise namin sa kanya, fast track, facilitate the liquidation so they will know how much exactly was spent and how much are available funds at a certain point in time.
Thank you. Well, considering, ma'am, that in this particular case, the records will show that the advances or the IRM funds were downloaded about the first week of April. April 6, many of these advances were downloaded. That's 120 days ago. Do you
Yes,
think
po.
that the liquidation is due or overdue?
Actually, it's overdue because as I have said, the regulation of COA is within 60 days.
How many?
Or upon within 60 days po, 60, sir.
60, yes. 60.
Yes, that's COA's regulation within 60 days. But according to them, they give them 120 days. And or 80, whenever 80% of the amount given to them has been spent, they can already liquidate. That's why our advice is by this time, for us to be able to know how much were actually spent and how much are the remaining balance in the regional offices or in the ACIs in the regions, they should fast track the liquidation already because that's already too long.
Yes. Well, we see Mr. President.
Yes, sir. Our chair is here already. I can see him.
Maybe.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Chairperson. Thank you, ma'am. Mrs.
Okay
Tuan.
po.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Just for the record, Chairman Aguinaldo, you confirm what your co-worker, Ms. Tuason, just said. that particularly on the liquidation.
Yes, correct.
Okay, firstly, Chairman Ginaldo, from the point of view of GOA, from point of view of GOA, is there something? Are there GOA rules violated by the system of an interim reimbursement